Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Lifelong Learners. We've had a number of episodes so far. Today, we have a special guest. We have Oscar Pedroso. He is the founder and CEO of Thimble. And Oscar, good morning.
Good morning, Jackie. How are you?
How are you? Good. So in Thimble, could you just tell us really briefly what Thimble is all about?
Sure. So Thimble is an education technology business. We're based in New York, and we provide coding and robotics education for K-12 schools and homeschooling.
Great. And we also have Josh Chernikoff. Josh is my co-host. So Josh, say good morning to everyone.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning to my friend, colleague, mentor, Oscar.
But first, if you are expanding your education business online and seeing the cohort-based courses becoming the standard, but not sure what the best step is, the upcoming class, Course of Action with Andrew Barry, is the perfect place to gain confidence you need to know if you're headed in the right direction. Join Andrew for 8 weeks as he shares everything he's learned in the past 15 years of teaching. How to create a learning community, how to scale your impact, what to prioritize, and even how much to change. You and your cohort members will build a community of online educators, hear questions, hear from education experts, and become superstar teachers along the way. So sorry about that shameless plug.
We got to pay the bills. So when Oscar and I meet up next time in San Diego, I can buy better scotch for you. But we got to pay the bills.
Got to pay those bills. So we have Oscar here today, and as he explained, his company Thimble. But Oscar and I had a conversation previous to today, and we both found out that we're frustrated teachers in the classroom. Oscar used to teach math and science in the class, and he developed Thimble. He developed other programs in order to deal with that frustration. So Oscar, tell us a little bit about how you went from the classroom to your ed tech businesses now.
Sure. So I actually started in higher ed. I was first a college admission officer where I went to school at the University of Rochester. And I was admission officer within the School of Engineering. A lot of my work there was recruiting students in public schools, mostly inner city schools in Western New York and Central New York, so as far west as Buffalo, as far east as Albany. And that's probably where I first started to see a major issue with kids just being familiar with different types of technology subjects, including robotics, coding, engineering, anything that you can think of that's as far as like skills that are in high demand. But then that was definitely my experience as a teacher in middle school. I taught math and computer science, and you could definitely tell there was just, a lack of programming for kids to learn about technology skills early on. You had your basic sciences, but there was very little outside of that. And so for me, it really hit home when I was working with kids who looked just like me, but had no idea what engineering or coding was. Mm-hmm. And so while I didn't start Thimble for like another 10 years after that, it was still the very beginning of just my observation of how messed up our education system is. So that was really the inspiration or the beginning of it.
Mm. Well, we are on a Facebook Live, and so there might be people in our audience today who are in the same boat that you were in those last 10 years. So if there's anybody out there who has a question, a comment, in a way that maybe Oscar can provide you some guidance to develop your own programs or work on your own projects, please, please, please put them in the chat so you can talk to him directly. So here we are, Oscar. We're both frustrated in the classroom. I had that experience last night, and things are not progressing. Can you tell us, please, once you started to develop your own programs, how that made things progress?
When you say programs, do you mean programs like at the school? Because I was actually, when I was a teacher, I started a few programs there, but then as an entrepreneur and starting these companies, I've also created programs as well. So I'm happy to touch on both.
Yeah, we have a number of entrepreneurs in our audience today. So let's address it from that angle.
Sure. I mean, so my first business that I started in the education space was really geared towards getting kids to talk about their projects. So the concept of storytelling, just from an admission standpoint, when I was sitting on the other side of the table interviewing kids, a lot of times they were brilliant, but just didn't have a way of really capturing their story. I had kids who had built their own computers, their own robots, had figured out things that wouldn't really come into existence for a few years in the market even. And so the first tool that I helped create was really just online project journals for kids. And it was geared for more engineering students, but that was meant to just help any student really be able to showcase their project like an artist would showcase their own portfolio of sculptures and paintings. So I was trying to do the same thing in the education space so they can better leverage their experience to land an internship or a job. Fast forward to what we're doing today with Thimble, we're the program that we have, the curriculum that we've set aside is really for middle schooler and high schoolers to get that exposure, give them an option to consider robotics, coding, and other technology disciplines without becoming fearful of it later down the line. We find that a lot of kids that enter high school aren't really ready to join a robotics team. And in many cases, the reason is because they don't have any sort of feeder program in the district, or they just don't have any sort of exposure. So they come up with their own opinions of what robotics and coding are, which ends up turning into, robotics is not cool. When in reality, it's just, it's there because it's nowadays you can go into any field and there's some kind of technology behind it. And there's much more out there than just business, law, and medicine. So really the program that we have is meant to give that exposure, create more hands-on activities for kids, and then hopefully get them to have their own skill set so they can go on and become part of these programs that already exist in their district.
Can I ask what happened? I consider Oscar a friend, a colleague, and a mentor, but I didn't necessarily know about the first business. What happened to the first business? Because there are a lot of entrepreneurs, and the answer could be it failed, which is perfectly wonderful because we all have to do those things. So what happened to the first business?
Well, so higher ed's really tough. So what ended up happening was we had this really cool MVP, minimum viable product. For those of you who don't know that acronym, it's just a basic product that at the time was just a very rough prototype that we were putting in front of schools, and we actually were able to sell into a couple 2- and 4-year colleges. But what we realized was the higher ed industry is very, very competitive and really tough to get into if you don't have the right relationships set in place and you don't have enough capital to basically get through that long sales cycle. So what ended up happening, one, I figured out that this was not sustainable unless I can raise $1 million plus. That wasn't going to happen. Yeah, right. Even 10 years later, it's still hard. But I had to make a decision. Basically, I either had to pivot or throw in the towel and call it a day. And I don't like to give up. So one of the things I started to realize the name of the company then was called GradFly. So what I noticed happening on the GradFly website is there was a forum of people talking about robots and drones and programming, and there was a combination of hobbyists and parents on the platform and students. But I would say, like a lot of people, one frustration that I kept hearing over and over again on the website was that people had this innate curiosity to learn. They just didn't know where to start. So it's like if they wanted to build their like a robot, for example, they weren't sure what the first steps might be, where to source the components. Once they had the components, how do you actually put things together? And it was through that insight that I spent like 3 months in the dark just trying to figure it out. One of the most pivotal moments was when we did an AMA on Reddit, and we just ended up posing like, what if we created a community for people to learn how to build these type of projects, but we supply those materials for you, and then we create lessons for you on how to build them. And we got like 1,500 followers that first week just from that.
Mm.
So we ended up not throwing in the towel, we ended up pivoting. And so the original business that I started, we ended up just changing the name. We kept the same tax ID number. We went from building a business in higher ed to building a business in K-12 instead.
Ooh. So,
Awesome.
you know, Oscar, I teach film and media arts and all of that. But this sounds really fun, building robots and what else? What else did you teach the kids?
Well, so robots is just like one fragment of technology. I mean, there's so much out there. It's funny because I talk to a lot of schools on a daily basis, and every time I do a lot of cold calling, and any school that usually the first thing that schools say when I'm talking to a principal or a teacher, they're like, "Oh, we already have a robotics program." But I always like to dig in a little bit. I'm like, well, what else are you doing other than robots? Like, what are you doing to teach your kids about agricultural technology? What are you doing to teach them about video game design and cybersecurity and music and audio engineering? And a lot of times I end up getting silence on the other end because they don't really have anything that they're offering. So the program is meant to really give kids a chance to build all sorts of devices so that they can learn about that. Like one of our projects is it's a digital compass, where the kids learn about GPS and navigation. Nowadays, we have GPS in all of our vehicles, and we use apps like Waze and Google Maps to get around, but we've never really stopped and think about how the technology works. And so our program is really meant to be hands-on, but also educate kids about everyday components that they use, even components that are in their own cell phone. We take this for granted, but a lot of our projects use components that are found in devices like cell phones and computers, and they end up building something else entirely. But it's less of a toy and more like real life components that, let's say, an engineer at IBM or General Electric is using to build some who knows massive project that they're going to bring to market at some point. But that's the example of like giving kids that exposure to play with components like that at a very introductory level.
Jackie, we're lucky that Dotan is not hosting this week, because Dotan and Oscar could go down a super long rabbit hole, about this stuff. Because we found out that when we sat at ASU GSV, the conference in San Diego, that Oscar and Dotan were many worlds away, but were playing at 6th grade and 7th grade and probably younger with computers and programming and things like that. So if we had gone down that rabbit hole as a listener, I might have kind of trailed off. But what I think is really cool about Oscar, among many other things, is that he is truly equal parts operator and salesperson. And you got a glimpse into that right then and there, in terms of how do you approach these principles, and they all potentially say the same thing, and this is how you engage them in a conversation. But then Oscar's also just obviously an amazing operator to be able to literally get these components, and it's beautiful. I don't want to take us too far off track, but the way that Apple packages products, Oscar's hot on their tail there in terms of when these kids get their products at home. I mean, it's really a beautiful packaging. So all those components got to be sourced. They got to get in there. They got to get to the homes. So, this is for people who are watching, if you think that you can be as good operator and salesperson, it's not so easy. Oscar's very good at it.
That's a really good insight.
It takes many years. Still learning.
We all are.
So if we go back into those years again, you were talking about how you created this Reddit community. For the people that are out there trying to pick your brain right now, what paths of finding funding would you suggest for them? Maybe something you've done.
So when we decided we wanted to move forward with building out Thimble, we knew it was going to take a certain amount of capital, a certain amount of time, a certain amount of people to bring the idea to life. At the time, my co-founder and I, we had committed to each other. When you're working with a founder or co-founder, you're basically married to that person. So, but we had very limited amount of money in our bank accounts. So we were looking for creative ways to bring this to market. We had done a ton of market research at that point, and we were able to get some friends and family funding along the way. But to really create a business that contains both hardware and software, we knew it was going to take quite a bit of money to bring it to life. So we ended up doing some research on various crowdfunding platforms like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and we ultimately ended up going with Kickstarter just because that's where we found there were more educational type projects that were brought to life. So we ended up choosing that as a way to raise our initial capital. And so that was, let's see, spring of 2015 is when we made the decision to do that. And then it took us about 6 months to launch it. So we went live December of 2015. And our goal initially was to raise $25,000. That was what our manufacturer at the time said would be the least amount of money would be to order product, you know, to basically get the minimum order quantity there. And so it was a 1 month campaign, and we ended up selling about just shy of $300,000. And that was really what propelled us into business. And that was such a huge shock for us because we'd never had any of that kind of success before. And so that was really like one of the first moments where we knew, like, okay, there's something here. Clearly there's something here. I mean, we knew that with the Reddit, like when we had that many people sign up for our newsletter, but then the Kickstarter really just validated even more that there was a business opportunity there. And
there must have been something that you did to get that amount of money through Kickstarter, because a lot of people put their projects up on Kickstarter and the other crowdfunding sources and nothing. So what's the trick?
You know, it's a combination of things. I wouldn't necessarily say it's just one thing. One is like you want to make sure you're actually solving a need. I don't know that you can just go onto Kickstarter with a random business idea and get that kind of funding. So we went into Kickstarter with this knowledge, this market research, and we had somewhat of a following. But then I guess the next step was making sure that we can very clearly articulate our business idea and vision in a super short video that was well made. And then we could also articulate that in the copy of the campaign. And so the combination of both those things really is what made that campaign go to life. We were lucky that we had the support of Kickstarter, and we were able to get some media to write about our story and campaign and our reasons for doing that. And a lot of that we started locally. We created a lot of hype here in New York. We reached out to every person in our networks, going back all the way to high school. And then every day of the campaign, we were on our computers reaching out to editors, writers, different publications, different blogs, parent blogs, toy blogs, technology blogs. And
Oscar, how much, before we leave that part that you're talking about, you know, being very specific, because I've never done a Kickstarter campaign. I took other route of raising money with, you know, partners, which is a whole nother, we could spend hours on that, but you went the Kickstarter route. Cool. Can you isolate, you know, for us, like, here's what we presented in the Kickstarter campaign that raised 300 grand. And here is the business today.
Yeah, I mean, so you're asking like the things we did that led up to the campaign and made it successful and how that translated.
Yeah, like, but that obviously worked, but you can't just, I don't think you can't just raise the 300K and say, we're set, business is done. We're gonna, you know, we're going to be a $300 million company. But from that writing that you did and that campaign that you created, how has the business changed? You know, you and I have talked about this, I think, but like selling to schools versus selling to parents, you know, selling, you know, in person. And we need to talk about, you know, going online, you know, and obviously one of the reasons we're here is click-to, but, you know, how much has the business kind of fluctuated from that original Kickstarter campaign?
It has quite a bit. We had our eyes set on the direct-to-consumer market. So a majority of the people that had expressed interest in what we were doing at the time were mostly hobbyists and parents. And so that was our go-to market, is sell subscriptions where you get a different kit in the mail. You log onto our website to learn how to build these projects from start to finish. Over time, we started meeting parents that identified as teachers and principals, different kinds of administrators within a district, and were reaching out to us asking if we'd ever plan to bring the product into the classroom or after school programs, which had always been, that was why I started Thimble, because I was really looking to create some kind of impact and change in the education space in K-12. We just saw that low-hanging fruit was to first start in the consumer market, but we got our first school purchase 2 years after we launched the Kickstarter campaign in 2018, and that was with the school here in Buffalo, which was great because they were like 5 minutes from our office. We treated it as a pilot and as a way to learn how to sell into schools, and we quickly got feedback on what we needed to do to improve the product. We didn't have any kind of professional development for teachers. We didn't have any sort of alignment to curriculum standards, which we all know now today, as we're actively selling to schools, is important. Fast forward to 2021, after 2 crazy years of the pandemic, we're really only focusing on schools now. We still have that direct-to-consumer model, but it's really just a fraction of the overall business. But a lot of the learnings that we went through these past few years helped us get to where we are now.
So how did the pandemic affect your business? I know you said it was crazy, but what happened? And more importantly, did you learn anything about your business during the pandemic?
Yeah, we were ready to start working with schools at the end of 2019. We had gone through an accelerator in Boston called Learn Launch, and all of our time spent there was building a strategy and plans for selling into schools. And then March of 2020 happened, and all those plans, we basically had to just pause what we were doing to figure out what was happening next. Because any school that we were calling, they were just like, there's no way, this is not a priority right now. Like we don't even know what's going on.
That was the same time that the letter of intent that I had to have my business get acquired, that company said, this is not the right time. So there was a lot of that going on at that point, right?
Right. So the beauty of being a small company is you can pivot very quickly. And I'd say in a week, we had made a decision to revert back to our direct-to-consumer model, with the exception that this time we would do things a little differently. Historically, when we first launched the business, we were shipping out a kit every month. If people were subscribing, they would get a kit every month. We ended up reducing the number of months so as opposed to 12 months a year, you're getting 12 kits. It's now once a quarter. So you get a kit every 3 months. And we introduced live classes, because that was, now that everybody, I think it was like 95% of schools shut down, there was this demand for parents to find extracurricular activities, any sort of a STEM enrichment, but clearly hands-on, and then some kind of virtual component there where the kids are learning from home.
I think this is our chance, Jackie. This is our chance. He's talking live classes, cohort based. He's teeing it up for us here.
Yes, and that was really so we ended up surveying all of our previous customers first, asking them if this was something that they would want for their own kids, and we had a great response rate for introducing live classes and having quarterly kits as opposed to monthly, and that was really the beginning of that. So we spent all of the pandemic really just focusing on the direct-to-consumer market, and then 2021, as things went back to in-person instruction, we started to take the cobwebs off of our K-12 plans from 2019 and finally putting them into action.
So you had mentioned that you had been in a business accelerator or in incubator. You talked about crowdfunding and your steps all the way up. How did you get into one of those?
Well, we've been through a few. The one in Boston was Learn Launch. We've been through Halcyon in DC. We've gone through SeedSpot, Telluride Venture Accelerator. These are normally programs that last anywhere between 3 to 6 months, and you get into them by applying to them through an application. sometimes their applications on their own websites. I believe there's f6s.com, where a lot of accelerators and incubators use that website as a portal for applying to their programs. So that's how we found out about those, and connected with other founders to learn more, see if it was worth it or not.
So you were in Learn Launch. Do you remember the names of other ones that people might be interested in?
Yeah, so Learn Launch, Accelerator, and then there was, so that one's for education tech. Then there's Halcyon Incubator, which is based in DC. That one's for social impact companies. Seat Spot is another one. That one we went through virtually during the pandemic, and that was for social impact companies as well. And then Telluride Venture Accelerator, they're based in Telluride, Colorado. So that was back in 2017. That was really more across the board. Any company could apply and be part of the program, but you had to live in Colorado for 6 months. And so we ended up doing that. And that was an amazing experience to be out there. But those are the few that we've gone through.
Okay, so the audience that we have now, are you saying basically just to Google these names and to contact them?
Yeah, most of these programs have program managers. They're in charge of the application process. Typically, I would reach out and ask questions about the program. I would normally ask to be connected to any alums that were part of the program at some point, just to see what their experience was like and see if it was worth it. And then from there, I just make the decision to apply. I've applied to a few others as well, but these were the ones that we were accepted at.
It's a lot there's a lot of stepping stones, right? I mean, you have these, we're talking about these accelerators and incubators, and that's stepping stones. And you tell the story of the business from direct to consumer to pandemic. And now we're back to selling to schools, something that you and I talk about a lot. I think for people out there, it's just, Oscar tells this story in a really relaxed way that he does pretty much everything else, but recognize that there's so much blood, sweat, and tears that goes into all this and pivoting, and you make that decision in a week and the pandemic comes and you had all these plans to sell to schools and you're like, no, we're going back to, selling to parents. And so, Oscar, you obviously deliver it in hey, this is what happened, but maybe for people out there to recognize, because this may be the low point of their business right now, that there's a pivot and there's a way out and up for sure.
And it sounds like Oscar's taking the advice that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, there have been some sleepless nights, and there are moments where I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to get through this? But I don't know, when you really want it, when you're passionate about something, and I've surprised myself sometimes where I was confronted with several challenges. It's a roller coaster, and
it is. And there's roller coaster of challenges and opportunities, right? And one of the opportunities we've been talking about, which I think that people probably also in this audience are here to get your thoughts on, would be the ability to pivot, yes, but also the ultimate pivot of which would be online. So what was your experience going online? Are you going to embrace the hybrid? Because obviously we've got to get back to in person, but the opportunity is worldwide online. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, as far as, one quick question for you is, are you asking more for during the pandemic or post-pandemic, or?
You don't get to ask any questions of me. No, this is now. This is now. I mean, because I think we've gone from pre-pandemic, maybe nothing online to everything online during, and now we got to embrace, we believe, from the click-to standpoint, talking to Doton, Future Man, which we've talked about,
Sure.
The hybrid here, the hybrid world. So what are your thoughts on the hybrid world? Because, you have your business model, but you also have this opportunity staring you in the face here of cohort-based courses online.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, it took a pandemic to I mean, there was already hybrid before the pandemic, but I think it came to light for sure during and then post. I mean, we're still in the pandemic, so, but I think it's, if anything, I think people have learned that hybrid is going to be the future of learning, just because I think people have realized how convenient it can be to learn online. I mean, it's not always the same when you have something hands-on, but like, I think it's going to be the way we educate the masses for people who don't have access to that kind of education or didn't previously. I think it's now just open, the floodgates basically. So, how we see that is we're going to continue to improve that model on the direct to consumer side. And there's opportunity to do that on the K-12 side as we work with these schools. A lot of schools obviously are going back to in-person, but a lot of them are asking, if we still have hybrid? Because not every student at some of these schools are fully in person for whatever reason. And so, that's like a challenge on our product roadmap right now, because we're looking to spend most of our time servicing these schools in person, but there's also a need for some of these students to continue working on these type of projects at home. So,
I wonder if there's a solution out there. I wonder if there's a solution out there to help out. Huh.
I wonder
about that.
Hey, Oscar, how does this hybrid situation help facilitate more engagement by the students, inspire them to really want to work? Because I'm finding that after we were totally online at my university, we went back to in-person. And I'm not finding that my students are particularly inspired to be back on the ground as the administrators insisted they would be. So how can your developments or the developments of others help inspire our students to become better students?
Well, it's interesting because I was just talking to a family that's subscribed to the Thimble, and their son and daughter are back in person in the classroom at their school, but their school still lacks a robotics program. Their school is planning on building out a VEX team and Lego Mindstorms and all this, but a lot of those things don't exist. So the only way they can get it is at home through Thimble and possibly other companies that are doing something similar. And in many cases, these kids sometimes know they already have an interest. So when they receive one of our kits and sign up for our classes, they are the most excited in some of our classes. They're the first ones to raise their hands. They're the first ones to help other students in our classes. So it's opened their world up a little bit, because now it's either education they weren't previously getting in their own classrooms at school. They now have access to that at home. In many cases, they're able to get a sibling to join. Sometimes it's a bonding experience for the entire family. We've had mom and dad sit aside their kids while they're taking classes. And that's just something you really can't replicate anywhere else. So in many cases, the nice thing is at this point, we've had kids that signed up last March that are still with us a year and a half later. I mean, and the growth is amazing. We've actually started doing some case studies on some students that are now like 7 to 8 kits in. They're learning how to solder. They're learning about more advanced programming languages. Some of them I've been able to connect with one-on-one via Zoom, just to ask, like, what are projects you're looking to build? Why you're, it's just, I could go down another rabbit hole here just talking about that whole thing, but it's just a whole separate world that the kids weren't quite exposed to before, that they're now getting, in their own room at home.
Josh, I think that Oscar's future man too.
Yeah, well, but actually he's definitely future man for sure. That's why he's got this business that is growing exponentially. But also, Oscar, again, it was fascinating for me because listening to you and Dotan talk, I didn't do any of these things. It just really didn't interest me, So what would it have been like if when you were 6, 7, 8, when you were doing these things, and if you had Thimble? You made it through, but what would life have been like had you had an amazing box delivered to your home with a follow-on conversation with somebody like you saying, hey, tell me What's working so well? What would have been like for you?
Yeah, so I'm a child of the 80s. So, back then I was playing around with Transformers and GI Joes and who knows what else. But I know like school was very challenging for me because technically my first language is Spanish. So, my parents are immigrants from Honduras. So they came to the US. They weren't really aware, or they didn't really know a lot about how the education system worked here. So I was kind of just thrown into school. And it was tough because I was learning English, but I felt like I wasn't really given that like extra nudge to pursue something like robotics and coding. I mean, if you would have asked me about that when I was 6, I would have been like, "What are you talking about? I don't know what that is." It
Yeah.
wasn't until like middle school where I actually had one of my friends was really into robotics, and that's how I ended up getting signed up to the robotics team in high school, not knowing very much, but I know that my life would have been completely different had I had a thimble kit or something similar back in the day, just to at least get some bearings and see if it's something that I really wanted to pursue. But there was really none of that.
And now you're helping these kids.
Yeah, you're talking about a whole new market today, because when I was teaching at Los Angeles Unified School District, there were 100 and I forget how many different languages spoken in that school system. And it sounds like those kids now were you back in the 80s, and how something like Thimble could have helped those kids.
Definitely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I still have conversations with teachers or administrators that have that exact same problem where they have kids from all different walks of life, but they don't really know how to spark any sort of curiosity around this. And almost every call that I have with a school, they're trying to just generate some kind of excitement early on in elementary school, just to start that feeder program into middle school and high school. The other thing too is because of all these languages, we're working with a school in Florida where the majority of students speak Creole. And one of the requests from the district was if we could translate our material into Creole. And that's actually a big goal of mine, is to translate our material into all different languages, including Spanish, German, French, so that we can level the playing field for students out there who might consider language as a barrier to learning. Although I say that loosely because a lot of times we've had many kids who don't speak English very well, and they still excel with the hands-on component and the coding as well. But we still want that added layer there for ease of use, because it does help a little bit.
Wow, that's amazing. So this is great. What does the future hold for Thimble and Oscar?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a question mark. I feel like I can only focus on 3 to 6 months ahead. Like someone asked me like the 5-year question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, I don't know. But I do have ideas. I mean, one is to open it up so it's not just STEM education, or it is STEM, but we touch on other subjects like chemistry, geology, more engineering. We're very much a curriculum that focuses on computer engineering and programming, which is very niche. And the skills you're learning, I mean, they could be applied in so many other areas. So one is continue doing what we're doing now. Our number one request is to build out curriculum for pre-K through 4th grade. So we have a product roadmap for that right now. It's a segue, more an introductory curriculum into a more intermediate and advanced curriculum that we have now. And then we are also working on curriculum that doesn't necessarily entail the use of kits. So more like courses on how to learn how to program. And then also we just submitted a National Science Foundation grant on augmented reality project-based learning, where instead of having a kit in front of you, you're now building it in an augmented reality space, which sometimes can be cost effective for schools when they can't afford materials. But then having that as a stepping stone, so once the kids do know how to build projects in an augmented reality space, they can then go on and move into like the real hands-on part, where they're now more familiar than they were before. So there's a few things there.
Jackie,
Still,
I think what you're hearing is like, the classic entrepreneur, which is Oscar's like, I don't know, but I'm going to try a lot, and one of these is going to hit and it's going to be fantastic. But in the meantime, you've clearly you figured out what you're doing, through relatively through the pandemic at this point. But while you say, I don't know what I'm going to do in the next 3 to 5 years, you do know you're going to try a lot.
oh yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I have and it isn't that I don't know. Like after doing this for almost 10 years of being an entrepreneur for 10 years, I know when like something is sticking. Like you throw a bunch of stuff at a wall, something's going to stick. But sometimes you see a pattern, and so being able to identify like certain things that are working for your customers, that's what I like to. I ended up writing those down and including them in my 18-month plan. And even if we don't get to it, we know that that's just something that we keep hearing. So. And that a lot of times can end up becoming what you're going to be working on 3 to 5 years from now. Yeah, I digress, but for sure.
No,
No, you're right.
I mean, I think this is absolutely fascinating. You're a man with big ideas, yes?
Yeah, there's so many. There isn't enough time to do all of them, unfortunately.
Well, but there's a lot of time, right? And you're not going anywhere and the business isn't going anywhere and you've got a lot of energy. So how do you get there? How do you take these big ideas? How do you get there? And there being success, and obviously we could just, talk about what success is, but how do you try all these different things and then, and feel good about it?
Yeah,
Not crazy.
3 to 5 priorities, small experiments, and making tough decisions. Are we going to do this or not? If not, let's set aside that on the back burner. Here's what's working. Let's continue to expand on this. But yeah, that and then pivoting.
So opportunities, pivot, decision, basically rinse, repeat. Opportunity, pivot, decision. Is it working?
Yeah, for sure. And it takes a village to build a company. So I've also relied on a lot of people. Like I'm gonna throw out John Gamba's name out there, who I know you know really well, Josh. He's
I don't think we've had a show that John Gamba's name or hair hasn't been brought up on, Jackie. But yes, bring John back in.
Yeah, John came into my life April of 2020 when I was in the middle of pivoting, and he was just such a great soundboard. And clearly, he's so knowledgeable about a lot of things. But he was one of the first people to help me land on our initial business model, our newer business model that we still have going on right now. But
John came into my life in October of 2020. Jackie, you?
Yeah, so we got to have John back, I think, because there's more to talk about. But Oscar, someone with your imagination and innovation, we have a lot of people who are listening to you right now who are starting their projects, but they might have in the back of their mind the idea that what they develop now might not be appropriate for the future. Where do you see the future of education going?
Oh, that's such a big question. I can see technology really well. Let me start with schools are like 5 to 10 years behind everyone else, and so and this is just based off of the many conversations I have with teachers and administrators. And it's not just STEM. I mean, there's literacy, there's after school programming, there's transportation, there's even just how administration does its own job. There's so many old school ways of doing things, and people haven't quite caught up to the 21st century. So even in just those things that I just mentioned, like digital literacy, filling the achievement gap, homework gap. I mean, we're part of this program called AT&T Aspire right now, and what I love about the program is they're focusing on all the big education problems that no one's really addressing right now. But I would say that's where the future is going, is like, how do we get kids to learn at home? How do we introduce students who don't speak English? How do we introduce them to these STEM subjects in their own languages? How do we make it easy for teachers who are being displaced from their English and social studies teaching positions to teach things like STEM? How do we educate them? How do we train them? I feel like that's where things are going, is providing more tools, getting administrators to think a little more creatively about how they're doing their job, and understanding that this is like really, really important. Because it took a pandemic to realize that the educational system is pretty screwed up, and there's a lot that needs to be done. So, I mean, I could throw a list of different problems, but I think it's going to take like a whole world of entrepreneurs to solve them for sure. I don't know if that helps. I mean, I don't know how much of a rabbit hole you want me to go down.
No, that wasn't a rabbit hole. That answered the questions from some of the people who are watching and listening to you right now.
Yeah. I mean, we're focused on just one thing, and that's just like STEM and how to make that accessible to kids so that they can consider an education or career path in STEM. As far as other areas that could be improved in education, it's going to take a whole ecosystem of entrepreneurs working together to come up with solutions. One of the things I love about Josh and his formerly working at Flex, they were thinking about partnering together, because one of the problems we hear schools are having is they don't have any teachers to run any of these programs that we're currently providing for schools. And so one opportunity has been to work with Flex to recruit teachers to be able to run these programs in person at these schools, which is something we technically can't do. We just don't have the bandwidth to go out and find talent. And so that's like an example of like where I see like things going. It's like, how do we get teachers to come into these classrooms, or people on the outside to come in and teach these classes when the school doesn't really have any of that?
Another classic example, Jackie, of there's just no, as the current CEO of Flex would say, whose father told us this, be a fountain, not a drain. There's no, in Oscar, there's only fountains, right? There's only like, okay, you're talking to a school district and they say, this is fantastic, but we need something after school. Okay, it's not something we're so good at, but let me talk to this group who knows it very well, and let us figure out how we're going to partner. No skin off your back, no work on your plate. We've got it. And so this is just another classic example, I think, of the pivot, and the pivot might mean relying on somebody else, but nonetheless, you pivot so that you can deliver.
So now that we know Oscar's amazing vision for the future for education, what's the future for Oscar and Thimble?
I have no idea. I know that I love what I'm doing now, and I'm going to continue growing the business. We were just awarded 15 district-wide contracts throughout the US. We're focused on that. We're still a small company. I find that I'm wearing many, many hats. So I just hired my first 2 sales folks to help me just focus on other things. Part of me has thought about maybe selling the business at some point in the future. I've thought about staying with Thimble for the rest of my life. I've also thought about other entrepreneurial ideas that I have unrelated to education that I'd love to do. And I consider those options, and I'm really just going with the flow. Like, I know what I want to achieve over the next year and a half. And at some point next year, I'll probably plan for the next year and a half. And I'm just going based on how we're doing right now. All I know is, like, I love what we're doing in the sense that we're getting into schools, we're educating kids. I have parents who have my cell phone number who are thanking me for, the experience that we've brought to their home, because their kids pre and during and post-pandemic have just really benefited from, one, building some really cool projects at home, and have developed a new interest that has turned into other things. Like we just had I just had a student that reached out to me. He started using Thimble back in 2016.
My apology.
Sorry, that was my watch talking. Who just got into Caltech, which is an amazing engineering school. But he reached out. Well, he and his parents reached out, thanking the company, us, and my team for the experience he had a few years ago, because it was a stepping stone for wanting to become an engineer and applying to Caltech. And he actually reached out at one point, because I have an admissions background, asking if we could help craft his story. But anyways, yeah, that's just an example of some of the things that make the company worth it and make me want to stay with it for a long time. As far as what ends up happening, later down the line, I'm not sure, but we'll see.
I'll tell you, Jackie, about Oscar. The two things that he does that make him successful is he's a good entrepreneur. He's a good person. And that's what you heard right there. I mean, he ran a good business and makes himself available, and people rely on him. And so I think the entrepreneurs out there who are listening, like, you can do both, and you should try and be a good entrepreneur and as good a person.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic way to put it, because he is a good entrepreneur, as well as his intent is true.
Yeah.
But Josh, might you have any suggestions, any guidance for Oscar for the future?
Oscar and I have this, I think, pretty cool relationship where we both see each other. I hope he sees me as somebody he can rely on as a mentor, because I've done a few things he hasn't, and then vice versa. And to be totally honest, right now, as I kind of go into the consulting world and I help other businesses grow, I'm relying on Oscar as a sounding board. I think he's got a business proposal coming from me in the next week. I've been working on it. I know I owe you that, to help me out a little bit. So, I can't necessarily give advice to Oscar on some of the stuff, but some of the stuff I can. And so I guess the idea here is just to find people that you get along with, that you respect, that can push on you, and vice versa. So, go out there and find your Oscar, and that'll help you a lot.
Yeah, similarly, I was thinking the other day, like, this is when we were texting each other through Vox, Josh.
Yeah.
Like, how cool it would be to work on a business together at some point. And that's like the beauty of being an entrepreneur, is you get to meet other founders. And this is not the case for every founder, but more often than not, you're going to meet people you really just enjoy being with, and you come up with really cool ideas, and you even think about like the possibility of working with them. And there's like, Josh is one of them. There's another guy that I know that I've been working with for years. His name's Lillian. Every time I talk to him, I'm like, when are we going to start a business together? Like, that's like maybe next steps. That's what it is. Is sitting down with some of these friends that I've met over the years and seeing where they are in their lives, and seeing if there's an opportunity to create something else. Whether it's related to education or not.
Let's have a summit in Mexico. Jackie can moderate the whole thing, and then we'll do this. Let's do it. What are we waiting for?
Great.
Get down here.
Yeah, sounds fantastic. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, but before we go, because we're running out of time as usual, I just want to mention to our Facebook group community that you heard both Josh and Oscar talking, and their message at the very end was, it is a community, just like we are building on Facebook right now, meeting other like-minded, like-hearted people to make our dreams come true. So having said that, I just want to remind you about our sponsor, that Andrew Barry is having his webinar, and please note that he will be a guest on Lifelong Educators on October 6th, but we are starting half an hour earlier. So that will be 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, Andrew Barry will be here on October 6th, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, to become another pillar in our community. So having said that, I want to thank very much Josh and Oscar for sharing their insight today. So anything you want to say, gentlemen, before we sign off? Thank
you so much for having me. Also, if anybody ever has any questions, I always love talking to newbie entrepreneurs that are thinking about starting their own gig. You can reach me at oscar@thimble.io. Ask me any questions. .io, yeah.
Or Voxer.
Or Voxer. That's such a funny app. I love that app.
That's fun.
So
And he's not only willing to help newbie people, but in being entrepreneurs, but he helps people who have failed multiple times, present company included. So get his Voxer and he'll talk to you all day long, off and on.
Great. Okay, guys, thank you so very much. Thank you for your insight, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jackie.